in my life, I was consumed with consumerism. You see the title in the bulletin? I literally loved shopping. I believe, addicted to shopping. You can have addictions other than alcohol or work or drugs or food. You can literally be addicted to shopping. And I think looking back on it, at that time in my life, I was addicted to shopping. It relieved my stress. I loved to shop. And I would, let me just try to paint you a picture. Let me just paint it this way. At that time, I had a credit card for every store in town. Now, let me tell you that I am a reformed alcoholic. I'm a reformed addictive shopper. Let me just say that. I am reformed. We'll get to the end of the story. But at that time, you could have taken my credit cards. I had a credit card for every store in town, probably for everyone in the neighboring towns. Stores you've probably never heard of. My teenage son loved the Buckle, so even though it was an hour away, I had a credit card for the Buckle. My credit cards, you could start right here at the beginning and stretch them all the way to that back door. I'm sure at that time in my life, I would have had enough to reach the back door. I was consumed with consumerism, materialism, excess. I was rich, but I was not rich towards God. Mike made a six-figure salary. I was working as a part-time pastor, and the rest of my time I spent shopping. My adult children, it was like a job to me. I worked as a pastor, and the rest of the time I shopped. My children today are wonderful, savvy shoppers because I took them shopping with me constantly. As a child, they knew where to find the yellow dots or the whatever happened to be on sale that day. Try this in a different place. Let me just paint you a picture of our lifestyle at that time. We lived in a fabulous house. I may have to use the little other mic. We lived in a fabulous house. It's what's called a passive solar envelope house. And in an envelope house, there's actually two houses built into one. You have the inner house and the outer house, and you have this space in between, and it's just a beautiful thing. And the entire back side of it was a 2-story solarium, and it had 24 sliding glass doors. It had 24 skylights across the top. It was, inside I had trees and I had flowers growing inside. I had basket swings. It was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. Out back, I had 150 rose bushes for those of you who are gardeners. It was just a beautiful rose hedge. To the east side, I had a terraced slope of tulips, hundreds of tulips. We had a swimming pool. We had a full-size trampoline. The boys loved to jump off the upper deck onto the trampoline. Noah always convinced Greg to go first, though, to try it out. We had a basketball court for the boys. We had, Jessica, as a child, had a stick-built dollhouse with real glass windows and doors and curtains and all of those things. Everything we wanted, we bought. We had a full-size conversion van with the television and the cooler in the back so we could go tailgating. We had a Jeep for off-roading. We had motorcycles. We each had a motorcycle. I still have my motorcycle license. I don't know why, because I don't use it, but I still have it. Noah had, when he was little, he had a motorcycle himself when he was 4 years old to ride out on our 5 acres. We had 2 professional go-karts that they raced out on the track. You get the picture of what I'm saying? Whatever it was, we bought it. As a child, and I rationalized it, and I say, well, Mike and I were poor as children, and that's why we were like that. We were so excessive, and not so much he as myself. But when I was a little girl, I only had one doll. Now, this is the sympathy part. You're supposed to go, oh, one doll. One doll. And the rest of my dolls actually came, the other group, the young group, didn't understand this. Some of you will know this. The rest of my dolls came from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. We cut them out. We cut out paper dolls, and those were the dolls we played with. That's what we had to play with. And so I was determined my daughter was never going to be deprived of any doll she wanted. So I brought her bin of Barbies to show you. Barbies and Barbies and Barbies. I showed these to Elena the other day, and she would pick one up and she'd say, "What's this?" And I'd say, "That's Barbie." And she'd pick up another one and she'd say, "What's this?" And I'd say, "That's Barbie." And she'd look at me. She's 2. She'd look at me and like, "What?" And she'd pick up another one and she'd say, "What's this?" And I'd say, "That's Barbie." And she confused, looked at me again, and I said, "They're all Barbie. They're all named Barbie." And she kind of looked at me like, "That's just not right." Even the 2-year-old knew that. You know, and I just brought the bin of Barbies. I didn't bring Barbie's dream house, which is this big, or the Barbie houseboat, which fits under a bed because it doesn't fit in the bin, or I didn't bring the Barbie RV, or the Barbie Porsche, or the Barbie horse, or you name it, she had the Barbies. And I didn't bring the bin of Cabbage Patch dolls, or the boxes of American Girl dolls, or the trunks of clothes that the American Girl doll has. I literally have a closet at my house that's just Jessica's dolls and things. I was consumed by consumerism. And then God intervened. God intervened in several different ways, and let me tell you about that. First of all, I want to explain to you how my budget worked. My budget worked like this. When we got paid, I put all the money in the bank, and I paid the bills first. I always made sure the bills were paid. I paid the house payment, the car payment, the boat payment, the motorcycles, the credit cards. I paid all the bills. And then the second thing I did was I shopped, and I bought whatever I wanted. And then the third and last thing I did, I would look at the bank account, and I would see, what's left over? How much should I give to the church this week? And with whatever was left over, I gave some to the church. And let me just say that it wasn't all that little, because he was making really good money. And so it turned out to be about the average amount that any American gives. Does anybody know what the average amount is, percent-wise, that Americans give? Any guess? There, right there, 2%. Across the country, whether we're wealthy or whether we're poor, most Americans give 2% of their income to God. To charitable purposes, I should say. To charitable purposes. And so I felt pretty good. I'm giving my average amount. I'm just like every other American. And in fact, one of the ways I rationalized it is I was working at a very, very small church, and what they could pay me was really only about what I was even giving them out of Mike's money. So, it was kind of like, I give them almost as much as they pay me. Why would I give them more? And then God intervened. The first event that happened was that I went to a national pastors' conference. I was a pastor, and I went to a national pastors' conference. Bob Roberts was the speaker. Many of you will have known Robert Roberts. Great American Baptist and a great man when it came to talking about stewardship. His entire presentation that day was on tithing, the tithe, 10%, that we really ought to give 10%. And he also talked about first fruits, the fact that we should give first to God, not to ourselves. And I knew all about tithing. I had been raised by a tithing family. My mom and dad, even when they were on a fixed income and later in life when they were on Social Security, the very first check she wrote was to the church for her 10%. And as a child, I remember whenever I got $1, it wasn't a lot, but whenever I did get $1, my parents made sure that 10 cents of that went into the offering plate. And I was always excited to take my little dime and put it in the envelope and put it in the plate when it went by. It was so exciting to give my dime. But 10 cents out of $1, that 10% seems a lot different than 10% of $100,000. It's a little more difficult to give 10,000 than to give that little dime. So I paid my bills, I went shopping, I gave my leftover to the church. And Bob that day challenged me to totally reverse that, to give my 10% first, then pay my bills, and then give myself the leftovers. Well, that wasn't enough to convince me yet. The second thing that happened was in my church, we had an estate auction. There was often auctions in the church. It's a country church. We had a 92 and a 93-year-old that passed away within 6 months of each other. And the family literally moved everything they owned out and put them on flatbed trailers and had an auction and sold off the entire life's possessions. And it was an interesting day. I came down because our ladies served the meal and stuff for the day. And I came down and I watched the Chicago antique dealers come out of Chicago and snatch up all the furniture because they were literally beautiful antiques. I watched the silverware that they ate with, real silver, be sold off. Their kitchen table, everything, their candlesticks, their bedding, their just entire, all of his tractors and all of his tools and everything down to the last little thing. An entire life gone in one day. And I went home and I really, really thought long and hard about possessions that week and what it meant to have all of those things that you literally can't take with you. And then the next thing that happened was Mike's factory went on strike. Now you might think, oh my goodness, they were actually on strike for almost a year. And you might think, oh wow, what did you do without income all of that time? But what you don't know is that my husband is a management type of guy. I'm from a union family, he's a management family. And so he was management, and it meant that he was working twice as much. He was working 16-hour days to run the factory when the union guys were locked. It was actually a lockout. They locked out the union. And he was making twice as much money. You know what? He was making so much money, I couldn't even spend it all. That was amazing. And what I found out is at the end of the year, after I was still doing the same thing, I was still paying my bills, still shopping. At the end of the year, I found out when I got my statement from the church that we had for the first time actually given 10%. Not that I had intentionally done it, it's just that I had so much money left over that I had actually given 10%. And also, at the exact same time, we became debt-free that same year. Everything was paid for, not the house. We all pay on our house, I think, but the cars, the motorcycles, the credit cards, everything was paid up. And for the first time, I had given 10%. And I wondered, was there a correlation? Had God blessed me because, and should I stick with it? And then I thought, well, I don't know. It took one final thing to really change me, to really totally change my addiction. And that was a trip that I took. I was in seminary, and I had to decide whether, we had to do an urban ministry requirement, and I had to decide whether I wanted to go to inner city Chicago for a week, or I wanted to go to Moscow, USSR for a week and study their urban ministry. So, of course, I took the Moscow one, and we traveled to Moscow. Mike came along as our photographer, and we had a wonderful week there. We met with the Russian seminary students. By the way, their classrooms were actually tin storage rooms, tin storage sheds, no air conditioning, no heat. They lived there, and they literally studied in those storage sheds. We met one Russian pastor student. His name was Sergei. He became a great friend during the week we were there. He was fascinated by my Bible. I had taken my big black Bible that I preach from, and I wanted to have my Bible with me, and my study Bible, and he loved it. He would, anytime we were together, he would just pore over it and look at it, and I finally found out why. Do you know why? He didn't own a Bible. Literally did not and could not afford to have a Bible. And I thought to myself, when I found that out, I thought to myself, of all the shelves back in my office with dozens of Bibles and all the different translations and all the Bibles I had, and how precious this one Bible was to him. Well, our final day there, we did a lot there. We visited churches and hospitals and, the conditions. That's a whole story for another time. But our final day there, we went to an open-air market. It was a new thing because they were just beginning to be able to do free enterprise. And this huge area was all of these little vendors with their market items and things like that. And we had been told, be sure and take lots of $1 bills because everything will be very inexpensive and you need to take dollar bills. They will want American money. They don't want their rubles. They want American money. So I had taken lots of dollar bills, and I was in my prime. Oh, my goodness, the things I bought. I bought Russian dolls, you know, those little stacking Russian dolls. I bought painted hand Russian chess sets, scarves, and Russian hats, you know, the furry Russian hats. I should have brought that with me. That would have been a nice visual. We still have those little Russian hats. Just all sorts of things. I just had a wonderful last day in Moscow. And then Sergey said, he'd been translating for me all day and bickering back and forth and getting me the best price. And he'd had enough of this American shopper. And he says, come on, we're going to be late for the bus. We've got to go. And I'm like, okay, and I'm dragging out. I'm just having such a wonderful time. And then, just as I'm ready to go, I spy one vendor, and he has, lo and behold, hand-crocheted Barbie doll dresses. And I'm like, oh my goodness, here, we'll pass one on each side here so you can see these. These are what changed my life. The Barbie doll dresses. He had hand crocheted, they have hats too, by the way, Barbie doll dresses. I thought, what a perfect souvenir for my daughter. I've got to take her back a handmade Barbie doll dress. And I said to Sergey, I said, find out how much he had for. I said, find out how much he wants for these. I thought, they're going to be really expensive. They're hand crocheted. And lo and behold, he said $3. I'm like, $3? Wow. Barbie doll dresses in the United States are $7, $8, $10 for a fancy Barbie doll dress. Why, I'll take all 4 of them. And Sergey goes, no. He says, that's too much. That's just way too much. You can't do that. And I said, but that's only $12. I said, yes, I want all 4 of them. And Sergey's arguing with the vendor, and he says, no, that's too much. How much? Well, the vendor by then, he knew that I wanted them, So he wasn't coming down. He's like, nope, $12. And I'm like, fine, $12. And I pull out a $20 bill because I'm out of ones, I'm like, here, $20 bill. Well, exactly right, Bill. He had no change. I don't know if he'd even seen a $20 bill before. He looked at the $20 bill and he's like, no change. And Sergey's dragging me by the arm now and taking me back to the bus and says, come on. That's too much. You can't have them, And I'm like, no, I want the Barbie doll dresses. You know what I did? What did I tell him? Keep the change. $8. I already figured out that's really only $5 a dress. I mean, that's still cheaper than in the States. And what other little girl in the United States have Russian handmade Barbie doll dresses? I had to have them. Keep the change. Sergey was so mad. I could tell as we're walking back to the van. He's just steaming. He's just so angry. And he gets back to the van and he launches into this Russian tirade to these other ministers and to the other people in the van. And I'm like, what did I do? Just because I didn't haggle and get a lower price, what did I do? Well, it took a while to find out, but Mike talked to the official translator to see what he'd been saying, what exactly the problem was. The problem was the $20 that I had given that vendor was exactly what his salary was for a month. In a month, he made $20 at his job. I had given, for 4 Barbie doll dresses, his month's salary. He had been launching into a tirade about excessive Americanism and all of our excessiveness. And you know what? He was absolutely right. And that mission trip and others to Nicaragua, to Costa Rica, to the homeless shelters, if you can't imagine the homeless shelters that exist along the beaches in Honolulu. In one side of the beach, towards Waikiki, there are high-rise hotels and resorts, and if you go the other way on the island, there are tarps and tents and people living under bridges with their children and their families. God asks that we give of our first fruits. And that trip literally changed my life. I came home a reformed shopaholic. Now, do I still shop? Yes, of course I still shop. But I don't do it to excess. I give my 10% to the church. And my 10% goes to the budget. It doesn't go to the extra offerings because those are extra offerings. Offerings like the backpack bash or the pigs for Haiti or the building fund reduction or the America for Christ. Those are above and beyond. I believe that the New Testament actually doesn't just teach us tithing, but the New Testament teaches us to give proportionately as God has blessed us. And we literally are the most blessed people on this planet. We are the most blessed people on this planet. Go home. You don't have to count up your Barbies, but look around you. What else do you have to an excess? Maybe it's food. Maybe it's candles. Maybe it's tools. I think most men have tools in their garage that they're never, ever going to use. I don't know. That could be just my idea. Could be just my idea. What about kitchen gadgets, ladies? How many of us have... I got out something the other day. It was a Pampered Chef thing that I'd bought sometime along the way. It was still in its box, and it had to be at least 20 years old. What do we do to excess? Oh, there's another Russian dress, the black one. God calls us to be faithful and to be generous, to give to the kingdom. Go home, get out your last year's tax statement. Get out your giving statement. Figure out what percentage you give. And even if you can't give 10%, think about increasing it a percentage. If you're at 2%, try a year at 3%. If you're at 4%, try a year at 5%. If you're at 10%, try a year at 15%. And God will bless you. God blessed us tremendously when we changed our lifestyle and when we put Him first in our spending. Would you pray with me?